Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ventures. I'm excited about today's episode with my good friend and world-class designer-developer, Perry Azevedo. He and I talk about product, design, how to compose a startup team. You know, when you're forming a company, there needs to be somebody who has the business aspects, somebody who understands the technical aspects, like if you're building a technical product. But what's often overlooked is the product and design and user experience aspects of things that sometimes the business person and the technical person think that they're good at, but they really aren't until you've worked with world-class people. So we spend time not only talking about Perry's story, how he has developed as a designer and developer, software engineer, but we also talk about how founders should be thinking about the process of the landscape of design. So if you're watching this show, you can also listen anywhere that you get your podcasts. You can just search for Ventures. And if you're listening, you can also watch by visiting wclittle.com, and there you'll see more extensive show notes to the things that we talk about today, including the product startuprocket.com that Perry and I both built together, and you'll get a glimpse in terms of where Perry's skills are at. We've had lots of positive comments about the experience design in that product. So with that, please enjoy this conversation with Perry Azevedo. All right, Perry, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm excited for this episode for a whole variety of reasons, but number one is that as we were getting Proto started, you were call number one. As I was thinking through the network, like, who do I know? Who do I trust? Who's a good person? Who's really good at their craft, like world class at their craft? Because I could write code and kind of do the back end things, but to really bring experiences to life in a thoughtful and meaningful way, there's no other that I trust more than you to bring those experiences to life. I've been so impressed with your career over the years. So would you mind just tell us a little bit about your background?
Sure, that's super generous. Yeah, my background is basically a combo of like design and technical. I'm not like the super technical like your back end infrastructure and stuff, but technical in the terms of like what the user sees, what the user experiences, that kind of thing. I mean, it really starts like all the way back when I was a kid. I mean, I was the kid who I played sports and stuff like everybody else. But I loved like, drawing Calvin and Hobbes cartoons or like pausing the Disney movies and seeing if I could draw characters. And then the next moment I'm at the computer trying to figure out HTML and CSS, and this is like back in the browser war days when we were just getting pictures and GIFs and video. Video then wasn't even a thing, but so yeah, that's where it kind of all started. And kind of my love for both of those things really crossed with what computers were starting to be able to do at the time. This is back with Windows 3.1. I was in Paint making it do things that it wasn't meant to do.
Yes.
I remember, I was like, my parents found like the most tech nerdy guy that they could find at their church. Was like, he's drawing things in Paint. What do we do? He's like, get him Corel Draw. Just like get him Corel Draw and like it'll be good. So yeah, that kind of set me on a trajectory. By the time I got to high school, I was helping to teach an HTML CSS class. The high school found like the only teacher who knew a little bit about that and put her in charge of like an entire class. And so there's another student and I that she leaned on to like help come up with curriculum. So we like helped build curriculum. And that resulted in me getting hired by our county government, right out of high school. So like I built their first website. Webmaster was the role back then. Like yes. There wasn't even web designers. So, I did that, and then throughout college, that kind of took a back seat, became like a hobby as I did the band thing, and that led me down a road where I got a lot of exposure to bands, started doing websites for bands, websites for my own, rock bands or garage bands or whatever, and then to pay bills, I ended up finding on Craigslist this ad for a shop in Seattle called Evo, or then known as Evo Gear. They were like buying used skis, and they needed to put them online, but they had to grade them, photograph them, put them on eBay, put them on their website. So they needed somebody kind of with a mix of like, a good eye for how to take photography, the skills to put this stuff online. So they needed technical expertise. So I got hired for that job. And that was kind of the first thing back into, like, professionally back kind of into that arena. From there, I went to a computer shop. They needed a designer who could code. So I started helping them, kind of like not a totally a rebrand, but like redesign a lot of their assets, their website, and hit a point at that job where I was like, I can see like what good design is and stuff, but how can I like go through the process of actually making it better, thinking through. So I ended up going back to school at that point, at Seattle Pacific. They have a visual communication design degree that goes through like the thinking of design thinking. They go through like kind of the history of how that developed. I went through that, and that was a huge, I think, point in my like development as a designer, where it went from like just doing pretty things, like putting a fresh coat of paint on stuff, to where I was learning how to like think through what are the business decisions, what are the like the user decisions, like going through and starting to ask the questions of like, why, how can we make this better, and then using that to dictate what I'm actually designing. So I think that was like the point where I was like, I want to do this, just this, like over and over again. So yeah, after that, I spent more time in the e-commerce world. I've been, did some stuff. You and I started doing some stuff, I think, right out of college, various startups around Seattle. Seattle was kind of a hotbed, getting to be a hotbed at that point for startups. You remember? Did some stuff with some people from SPU on their early business ideas, and we got those out in the world, and that was fun. And then I kind of transitioned and did some nonprofit work. Helped a nonprofit in Seattle with a big redesign. This is right around when the web was doing responsive design. We're trying to figure out like how to do responsive design, and so we had to go through a lot of those problems and figure out how to solve them, how to make websites and web apps that work for mobile and tablets and desktops, and then after that went to the agency world. That was fun, but that kind of like made me really go like, I like doing digital products is kind of what I learned going through the agency stuff. I really enjoy making digital products. So I went and from there I got a job offer from Squarespace in New York, and my wife and I and our 1-year-old at the time, we decided to move from Seattle to New York, and went and worked for Squarespace. And that was just a ride. I mean, I was like, I don't know, employee 200 something when I got hired, and they tripled in size in a year and a half time. So just rapid growth. So I learned a ton there. I mean, world-class JavaScript engineers, world-class designers. I felt like a fly on the wall, just getting to soak up and learn so much. Just world-class how to build product at scale, how to go through like just all the data that they are able to collect and synthesize and then turn into good design decisions. And then from there I decided like, hey, I want to come back into like early startup stuff, because I really enjoy the multi-hat, right? I like designing and I like developing. I like kind of like you were saying, like I like going from that or even early branding exercises and kind of going all the way through to actual product. And so that's kind of what led me down the path of like going out on my own. I opened my own shop. I was working in a co-working space with a bunch of other people who do similar stuff. And that's when I got the call from you of like, hey, what are you doing? And I think you had been going around and interviewing like different startup studios at the time. That was like just starting to like that was becoming a little bit of a buzzword, even though it had been around for I think a couple years by then.
Yeah.
And you explained at least at the time, what that, idea is, what a startup studio is, how it works. And I think my words to you were, that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. That's amazing. So yeah, so that's kind of what led to the early days of Proto with you and me, experimenting with different, business ideas, getting to know other people, expanding the network, experimenting with different flavors of what has become Proto. Yeah,
It's been
uh,
quite the journey thus far,
it
for
ha-
sure.
it has.
So I'd love to go back to when you first, let's say, the government job right out of high school.
Sure. Yeah.
When thinking about the evolution, because you're now at a world class design and development level, but I'm curious from an education standpoint to kind of follow the thread about the
Hmm.
development of your own understanding of design for human beings,
Yeah.
specifically digital interfaces. So, if you could think back to your government job, what was your design process then? What tools were you using to bringing those experiences to life,
Mm,
even in those early days?
yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, tools then there were not as many when it comes down to what we have now.
Yeah,
But like with the government, I mean, there's so many different. That's an interesting one. There's so many different stakeholders, quote unquote. I
yeah,
mean, a lot of your stakeholders are the people your officials are working for.
mm,
So what was interesting with that one is that was a very um, by the nature of what we were doing, you're forced to think about your user. I mean, this is before we were even, I think, talking about user centered design. I don't know if that language we even had then, but that's essentially what that was. I mean, there
mm,
was no marketing or web department then. So I think the department that hired me was like the transportation and land services, and that was because they were the ones who needed stuff on the web the most. And some of the stuff that they needed, besides like the typical, like we you know designed out and thought through like how is all these different departments structured and how can we represent that on the website when people go to the website, what are they actually looking for? Like they don't need to just see like you know they don't need to see the org chart, but they are looking for a specific department or a specific person, or they need to talk to somebody. And
yeah,
so a lot of the process is just that, right? Like who's going to be visiting this website,
mm,
what are they here for, and how can we get them that information or that contact info or whatever as quickly as possible. And then there are just other things that are the nature of what they do. So like the transportation land department, at least in the Wenatchee Valley, I mean, a lot of what they were dealing with, at least at the time, were neighbors calling and complaining that, hey, my my neighbor's raising pigs. I don't think they're inside city limits. I don't think they can do that. Or my neighbor's got like 7, 10 different cars, parked around their property. Like it's not a junkyard. Can you do something about this? And so they
yeah,
had this process of like, we need to go out, photograph, get evidence, and then they were trying to figure out how do we digitize this process. I mean, they were
mm,
using film cameras and had to go develop it, and so we did a lot of digitization of that stuff as well.
mm,
In addition to like the public facing website, there are also like the internal side of that where we could send somebody out with a digital camera, bring it back, they give it to so and so, that gets put on the internal site, so that they can go through and do their job. So yeah, I mean, a lot of that was what we now call, user centered design thinking, thinking through like what are those user flows, what are those user stories, like the like beginning to end, like here's where they start, here's what they need to accomplish, and where they need to end up,
mm.
and then designing our digital experiences around those real world scenarios.
So how did your understanding and development of even your own craft change from when you went to school? So it sounds like you were doing a lot of work before that, just sort of tinkering around, getting some professional experience.
Yeah.
And then you had mentioned kind of school was sort of a big shift. What specifically in the craft do you think developed, or what perspectives changed after going through formal training?
I think a lot of that was like the formalizing of a lot of what I was learning, kind of like,
Mm,
I was learning on the job and through experiences, but like what school for me, so I think some people can uh intuit a lot of that stuff naturally without school. I mean, I've got lots of designer friends who, I mean, man, they get
hmm,
that process. For me at the time, like I intuited some of it, but I think for me there's a disconnect into making it visual. Um and so school for me was like taking that, like the hypothetical or the philosophical, and then it gave me the tools of like, here's all the like historical like thinking that has been done and experimentation that's been done on how to actually translate business goals into something visual, right? So everything from, I mean, as an example of the kind of stuff we did in this design school, I mean, they had us take different uh, different fonts, typefaces, and they had us print them out on gigantic pieces of paper, like, and just pieces of one letter, and had us trace, uh, or even like just on a separate piece of paper, try to recreate just like a piece of an E or a piece of an S or a piece of a T. Um, and when we first did that, I mean, they didn't tell us why at all, and we're all like, "This is really weird. Why are we doing?" I mean, we're not even doing the whole letter. Um, and then as we went on through that, semester, what I learned was uh, they were training our eye to see every little piece of anything visual, whether it's blown up or it's from far away. And then in subsequent semesters, we started going through the principles of design, which include things like, if it's a curve, there is an emotional response to a curve that is
mm,
different than a sharp angle.
mm,
Because in real life, if you encounter something that's a sharp angle, especially something like maybe metal, right? Like, that, from experience, that that's potentially dangerous,
mm,
or right, if you touch it, you could get cut or scraped. Something that's soft, or well, something that's rounded is softer or safer. Dull, right? Like your pillow, you have an emotional response to, that's very different than a rock, and that's why you sleep with a pillow under your head and not a rock. And so visually, our psyche takes cues from things, whether we realize it or not, that are very similar to just what we experience in the real world. And so for me, design school was learning all of those things that we all know innately, but actually like having us think about them and internalize those in a way that as we're designing, we're actually thinking through those things. And then even the silly stuff they had us do, like blow up giant letters, man, that trained my eye, where now it's like, if I'm mentoring another designer who's working on a logo, um, they might have like the concept down, and it's a great concept, but then I can come in and even help, like, hey, let's tighten this up so that this is going to like communicate everything that your concept is, right? Like, your concept's great, and these pieces are communicating, but these pieces over here are in tension with that concept and communicating the opposite of what you're intending, right? So I think for me, that's what design school really helped, was linking the craft with the philosophical.
yeah. So, in broad strokes, then, in startup land, when you think about the executive team that gets an idea
Hmm.
off and running, there's typically a business person and a technical person, and what's often missing is the product design experience. So, there's even been this triad of hacker, hipster, and
Yeah,
right, right, hacker,
yeah,
hustler, hipster.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
You know what? Even when we were started the original venture studio, we started building products because I was a little bit more of a business person and a hacker programmer folk,
Hmm.
and you were the product design, uh,
Yeah, a little bit
thinking
of
through
hack.
that experience, which is why we were able to be effective. What is
Yeah.
your advice for business people who are maybe pairing with a technical person who think that
Hmm.
they don't need design, they're just gonna
Hmm.
or whatever that means, right? they're just going to get off and running. What is your advice for somebody, let's say even before they even are choosing their team, and then they understand that this day and age, the consumer experience, the design of their product is extremely essential. I think the world is waking up to that now.
Yeah.
What is your advice for that founder as they're thinking about finding their co-founder in that realm?
Yeah, I'd say like there's the two pieces of design. I mean, there's probably more than that, but I mean, in relation to what you're asking, there's the design that everybody that founder needs to hire needs to be doing at different levels, which is the experience. And some founders are fantastic at it because they're they had if they had the original idea for this, they have the vision of what it should be. They're thinking through business decisions, so they usually will have a really good handle on the user story, and that is a lot of design right there. That's what we call like design thinking, and that so that's the one piece, is that if you don't have a good handle on that from a product perspective, you need that person, and that might be your technical founder, that might be a designer or a product person, but you should have, in my opinion, a triad is a really good founding team. And you see throughout history, like in a lot of these duo teams, they have all the three skill sets.
Yes.
So whether it's two or three people, the three skill sets are that, like CEO, CTO, and then that design or product thinking, and it's more than just the visual. It's that overall like design thinking, user centric thinking. When it comes to the visual side of design, I think that's become now just a given in our industry. Like with digital products, it's so prolific now. Everybody has a phone. I mean, more people are on the internet through a phone than a computer now, right? So it's really becoming this ubiquitous technology that is permeating the world, and I think the projections are that eventually most of the third world countries as well are going to be using cell phones. So it's this design is everywhere, and people are starting to just expect when they go to a website or they download an app that it's going to look good, or it's going to work well. And if it doesn't, because of the nature of these devices and download speeds, the ability to pull up a website and get to whatever you're looking for so quick, our expectations in our brains now have gotten way shorter than previous generations of like how long we're willing to wait for things. So if your app or your website doesn't go fast, if it's not optimized, and if it's not an enjoyable experience, people don't have the patience for it. So I think those are the things that a founder needs to be thinking through, is like, hey, like beautiful design as well as functional design, as well as the overall experience, like those need to be in concert. And so if you or your technical founder are missing any of those pieces, then that's your next co-founder or your first hire.
Yeah.
Get that design lead or that product lead, because they're going to be able to help you think through those pieces.
So if you had to pick one, what would you pick? Because basically the business people and technical people, from my experience, tend to just either straight up overlook the importance of product and design, or if they know that it's needed, they basically say, okay, so-and-so, just make it look pretty.
Yeah.
Without an understanding of the whole universe that is design and branding, and bringing those, the whole architecture of the experience for the consumer. So what should the business person and the technical person, from an education perspective, you've touched on a lot of it, but maybe to summarize it, what should they be at least aware of in terms of all the different facets of who they should be looking for? And then who should they focus on if they had to pick a skill set? Because obviously it's impossible to find somebody that can do all of it. But in
Yeah,
early
yeah.
stage startup land, where would
I
you
mean, early stage startup land. I think it really depends on that business person and that technical person, and what they can cover or not. If they if they can think through the design thinking, the overall like
mm,
product stuff, get a really good designer.
mm, mm,
Get a really good designer who's going to be able to focus in on making it look good, of course, but also helping you translate those user stories and those user flows and those business goals into a product that doesn't just look good, but that functions well. And if you have a hard time thinking through, like if you're the founder and you have a hard time thinking through like digital product in terms of like those user flows or user stories, you know, find a product person. The product person can hire designers to help with the actual like pushing pixels. But getting that person who can think through product is key. And if that's not the two of you or the one of you, like and like I said, sometimes I work with a lot of CTOs who are really, really good product people. So if your CTO is the
yeah,
product guy, then go get that designer. And then
yeah,
the two of them are going to be, they're going to be the dynamic duo. When you've got a CTO or a designer, and designer now, I mean, it's, maybe it's a chief level, maybe they're your first hire and it's a like
yeah.
design lead. That doesn't matter. You give them the title they want. Like titles don't really matter, but getting a really good designer and a really good technical person, as long as one of those people can do the product design, the UX. If that's not you, then you're good.
That's a good word. And a word of caution to the business folks out there, because I've been down this road many times myself. I used to think that I understood product. I used to think that I understood the markets I was going after and could design a product from an architecture standpoint and hand it off to a designer. But it wasn't until let's say the last 10 years that I started working with world-class product people did I realize that that's not my skill set. I'm not patient enough. It requires a tremendous amount of diligence into understanding the customers, that I
Mhm.
tend to be a little bit too impatient, too a little off the cuff, thinking like, oh, it'll all work out and they'll understand this. But that's so many products the last 30 years
Yes.
have been built by people who think that they are good at product but aren't. So I would, for the founders in there who think they're good at product, I would highly recommend ask your friends if they think that you're good at product. And even what we mean by product is different than we've been sort of setting up this dichotomy between product and design. Obviously they're interwoven, but it's
Hmm.
important to understand the distinction, because being able to understand the market and the customer deeply, empathetically, who they are as a human, what their
Yeah.
problems are, how their emotions, all the different aspects of their emotional response that you talk to, and then being able to take that to architecturally set up what the product should be. That's what we mean by product.
Yes.
And so then how you bring that to life, that requires a different type of skill set. So from my experience, most people don't understand that nuance. And I think the
Yeah.
earlier you can understand that, the better. Is there anything you'd add to
Y-
that?
Yeah. I'd say like I think there's a little bit of truth in the like if your design there was I don't remember the phrase, but like you are, if you're the audience, you're making something for you. There is a level of ability we're all going to have to be able
Mm,
to design for ourselves, right? That's true. But nowadays it's like with so many things, uh, it's not just you. It's not going to be just you. You might have some initial, true gut reactions and thinking through your product idea, especially if you are one of the first users and you're making it for yourself, because it's something you see a need, like of course. But as soon as you get that out in the world, and anybody anywhere can download it, um, it's not going to be just you, as the user, and I think a lot of us who have um, grown up in like kind of the traditional tech world, I mean, you and I have not been in like lived in the valley. We've been to the valley, but But I think historically it's been like that, or Seattle, which has been predominantly, Caucasian, or like for us in Seattle, Asian, men who have built this stuff. That's not the audience.
Mm,
This stuff is global, and
yeah.
so you've got to think globally. You've got to think through your product being in, any race, religion, background, disability. Like, you got to think through all that kind of stuff with your product. So it does, like you said, it takes a
Yeah.
lot of time,
Yeah.
a lot of thinking, a lot of critical thinking, a lot of testing, getting it out in actual users' hands, getting their feedback. And there is a good deal of, intuition that goes into it as well, but you can't just do that.
So two of our earliest products, as we were getting the party started with Proda, I remember in the early days. One, we came alongside a founder named Patrick, who we have actually an episode. I'll link to it in the show notes.
Yes.
He came to us with an idea. Love to chat about that a little bit, and then we were also had our own idea, because in the early days we were just cranking out our own things with
Hmm.
Startup Rocket, and so that was an interesting journey as well. But let's start with VendorHawk. So Patrick came to us with an idea
Hmm.
where he wanted to help medium to large size enterprises manage their spend for
Yeah.
for all their SaaS products. And it's often a bit of a zoo, and large enterprises or even medium sized businesses don't understand how much they're spending. How when a founder comes to an idea like this, from your product and design perspective, what are the first things that you think about? Like, I don't know if you remember those first conversations with Patrick, but like, how did you even go about the process to identify what kind of visual identity and what kind of logo? Because I mean, you did the logo, and like, how
Hmm.
what was the thought process through that?
I mean, we started with, what the product is, how he envisions it, who he envisions using it. Like you said, this was going to be for, you know, all different size companies, but more larger companies that have, you know, lots of different software products that they're subscribing to, have licensing deals with different departments. These are companies that have multiple departments, and so you've got this department who's using this software, and that's this. So we went through that whole process of like figuring out who exactly is using this, and then who's going to be buying it, because in a large corporation,
Yeah,
person who's buying it's often different than the people who are using it. So we went through that whole exercise and dialed in the messaging, so that it would be, both to the people who are using it, because often, it's, what we kind of found through our study was like, it's going to be somebody who's like searching for this kind of a
mm,
thing, or
mm,
or we're going to be targeting a specific kind of person who has the pain of like trying to figure this out, and then also making sure all the messaging is lined up for the people who are making a buying decision. And then from there, we're going through like, a combination of what this service is that they're offering, and thinking through different archetypes. And like you said, you can refer to the podcast that you did with, Natalie and Elizabeth, on some of the more like branding specific,
yeah,
stuff. But we went through many of those exercises, and then tried to like combine that with some of the like, I referred to, like, even like in design school for me, like, how do you take some of uh, these principles, or these like different philosophical ideas we've got about who's buying this, and who you are as a company providing this, and translating those then to like something that's actually, um, giving you that feeling, right?
yeah,
Like, and then it really does come down to that feeling. I mean, we like to think as humans that we're very logical beings because we have logic, but we're actually more emotional than we are logical. And we operate out of those emotions often way more than we do our logic. So a lot of the visual, like the logo, how it looks, all that really comes down to like, how does this make buyer feel about
yeah.
this product, and trying to connect that to the truth of the product, right? Like, this product is really trying to simplify all your different spend, and so we need to communicate that in a way that you feel that. not just that you're reading it, because most of us don't read. We see first and then we read. So
And that ended up being a very important foundation for Patrick, as he was able to then focus on selling, uh, getting his initial customers. So I'll link to the show on that, so you can, so listeners and viewers can hear that story in depth, because it's
hmm
quite amazing. And they ended up, within 3 years, ended
yeah,
up raising money and then selling successfully to ServiceNow. So that's quite the journey. That also put a little validation in our, yeah,
which is not normal. Like
not normal.
that's a no. It's like a what, an average like 10 years
Right.
before. Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah. So then the second product. So that was an angle, for us helping out founders, which we do at Proda, and that's frankly what we do more now these days.
mhm.
But in the early days, we were also building our own products. So do you want to talk a little bit about Startup Rocket? I mean, we built that. You and I literally, like, we were both writing code. I was on the business side of things. You were on the design consumer experience. So you and I cranked that out very quickly and launched an initial marketing campaign. But do you want to share a
Yeah.
little bit about, I've had so many positive comments about your design and user experience in that app over the years. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you developed that and how you were thinking about that product? And even for those who aren't familiar with Startup Rocket, you want to share a little bit about it?
Yeah, sure. And you're thinking specifically like the branding and the design, visual design of it, or
Kind of, well, holistically, even that's
yeah.
insightful to know that,
Okay.
it's a bigger world. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the idea of it really in the early days for us was, I mean, we were using Google Docs for so many different things,
Right.
because like, I mean, early on, right, we had no budget, uh we were interacting with so many different people, right? Like we had one project over here, one project over there, and that got to a point where it was just getting like, we need something to organize this better, like, I mean, Google Docs are awesome and we still use those today, but for the actual, like, going through the process of building a startup, like kind of soup to nuts, as we sometimes say, like, um we had a kind of a good framework in our mind, and we needed it not uh not having to recreate it all the time. So
Yeah.
that's really where it came down to, is like, let's just build this into an app that we can, whether you've already done, the first several pieces of this, or sometimes somebody came to us with, hey, we've done X, but now we're at Y and we need help here. We also built the product so we could just jump in at Y and go from there. So yeah, Startup Rocket it's essentially a startup tool for going from a beginning idea, like going through that ideation process, validating that idea, and going through that process, and and a lot of these, you'll go back through as you have to pivot, or you have to, like, iterate, and then creating that product, growing that product, funding that product. So Startup Rocket's really built as an online tool that you can use in building your business. Um, on the design side of it, I mean, I think, had the name Startup Rocket uh, already, and so you could already came with that name, and we might have done a couple iterations to see, like, should we do something else, but we really liked it. It's a good name, really good brand, you know, and so the visual identity, it was kind of easy from there. I mean, you have a name like Startup Rocket, it
Right.
was like, there's not a lot of, I mean, you could get esoteric with it if you want to, but when you're talking about startups and launching a startup, the brand kind of speaks for itself. So yeah, a lot of the visual identity was a quick, rapid exercise we did at the time, of just going through, like, what's some historic, you know, um, imagery and graphic design we can pull from. Fortunately, there's a lot of, like, great graphic designers who have done some really great, work, and we were able to get inspired by some of their work when we were putting ours together. And that's kind of how we set the brand, and got a really early uh, template to then build upon, and we iterated and built on that over the years. So
Yeah, and even I remember the teams that were helping us even through that initial identity as we were roundtabling it. The hexagon logo. We got
Yeah.
a lot of comments on that. It was actually a hint. Was because of my background as a scientist. It was a hint to the
Yes.
benzene ring, as because the founders need to be scientists. They need to be running experiments
Yeah.
and continually learning. So it was a bit of a hat tip to that, which
Yes.
I've always sort of secretly appreciated, even though many people don't necessarily know the origin of that
Well,
aspect.
and that's another fun thing about design too, right? Is like you go through logos and illustrations that companies use, and there's a lot of stuff like that
Yeah,
out there that people don't even
no
realize.
idea.
And honestly, like that, a hexagon shape. You and I had talked about this at the time. Like that does have a little bit of just innate communication that people just receive when they see a hexagon. Like that's going to say certain things that
Even
are
like
more.
nuts and bolts. Yeah,
Yeah, it's like
kind of
so
like
you get that like that technical sciencey feeling from that, but like the specifics of what you just outlined, like 99% or more of the people out there aren't going to ever know that. But it's still a really fun thing to put that in,
right.
right? Because for those of us who work on Startup Rocket and are part of that team, it's like this inside joke, or not joke, but
Sure.
inside Easter egg that
Right.
that we enjoy.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so from there, I mean that. So we ran that initial marketing campaign. Thousands of people signed up for it, and then
Hmm.
we realized, oh, okay, we as an organization are using it to administer and track our own ventures through our own venture studio.
Yes.
But then other organizations said that, hey, could we use this software to organize our own incubator programs or
Oh
business
yeah.
model
I mean, we had
competitions or
we had
accelerators? Yeah,
incubators right out of the gate asking if they could use it.
right.
Yeah.
Exciting times. So for you then, for you personally, what in your next level? Because I know that you're a lifelong learner and you're constantly learning things. What is the next stage for you? Like for somebody at your level of design
Hmm.
and product sensibilities, what is the next horizon for you? Give us a little glimpse in terms of how you're growing and the things that you're thinking about these days.
Yeah. I mean, right now there's a lot more you can do with what we're just calling no code. I remember having a conversation with you a couple years back where I told you, uh, Will, we're coming on a reality in the future where we're not going to need to code anymore. You remember this? I was
I
like,
remember this.
I was
Yeah.
like, we're going to be able to talk to Siri and say, or whatever the virtual assistant of the future is, and be like, okay, I want to build an app, and here's, and then you just talk your assistant through it, and then the computer, you know, using AI and all the massive amounts of open source software we have out there. I was envisioning this future reality where it's going to be able to pick the best. It's going to learn from the best of code that's out there, and it'll put the code together for you. And so, in my mind, I see this future where like designing is going to be way more important. When I say designing, I'm
Mm,
talking more less I mean, the visuals will still be needed, but even more just like the product, like thinking through
yeah.
the user story, the user flow. That's going to become even more important because that's what programming is going to be. And
Mm,
then on the other side of that, your deep programmers who are working on AI and thinking through architecture and teaching the AI. Like there's going to be a human component with even teaching the AI in the future on how to build this software. And so anyway, I remember saying that like way back, and what's cool is that now for the visual side of that, we're starting to see a bunch of companies out there who are doing this no code stuff, which is the first steps of that reality.
yeah.
So I think that's kind of a one thing that's on my horizon that I'm starting to play around with, and getting really excited about what you can put out there, especially for a startup, to be able to like have that idea and then just go and get something out in the world that works, that people can start using. I mean, now you can get your validation immediate with something that looks and feels real and is real. That's the crazy thing. Like what you can do with these no code um, tools out there now. I mean, you can start getting customers and getting paid on something you build without touching really much code, if any code at all. So
Yeah, I think that future, we're starting to see more and more deal flow from people that are on their no code solutions, that are looking to make that transition into their own custom applications. And so they're ahead of the curve a lot, because they've thought about product. They've saved time to be able to think more deeply about their customer, so
mhm.
that when it comes to the time for them to build their own application, they already have a lot of those product learnings in place, so that working with somebody like you into their custom software can just take that to the next level, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
then for you, I'd imagine I imagine it's extremely satisfying that you can go all the way from your deep design expertise all the way to coding, to bringing those experiences to life in web and mobile experiences. What for you is that, like, what is that level of satisfaction to be able to go soup the nuts, because you can do the software engineering and you can do the design? But what I'm also curious, because not everybody can do that. What are also the limitations for you personally that maybe you've found in that, if any? I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about like the T individual a lot, and for those who aren't familiar, that's like where even those of us who do like are more generalists, which is what I really am. I'm more of a generalist than anything. The being able to touch lots of different disciplines is the top part of your T, right? And then the bottom part of your T is supposed to be longer. That's where you go more deep, more in depth. I think for me, that bottom section of the T tends to be more of the like the user experience
Mm.
parts of that, right? So it is the visual UI, it is the thinking through of the consumer, the customer, right, the user. Like I do really well being able to get into that space and think through the implications of things, and making sure we're eliminating pain is what it comes down to, right? Just like making sure that you can get from point A to point B without confusion, or without getting lost, so for me, I think that's the deep
Mm.
part of me. And specifically with digital products, I mean, I've done throughout my career, I've done stuff in the physical, like I've directed music videos, I have I've made print material for marketing campaigns, I've done a lot of like the traditional graphic design, and some photo video, and it's like I can hack my way through that stuff and enjoy the process, and because I'm a creative, I can produce good stuff. But my sweet spot is it's digital, like
Mm.
digital products, that UX UI, getting into the code, um but even like then on the coding stuff, even though I've been able to pick up most technologies and that kind of thing, there'll be guys who can code circles around me. But then like I can think through the implications of like, okay, here's some different framework options we have.
Mm.
Why are we using this one over this
Mm.
one? Like that's where I tend to exist, is more in the I can think way down the road
Yeah,
and see,
that's so important. Yeah.
yeah, like what are the implications of us picking this framework over this one? Where is that going to bite us? Do we need to roll our own? That kind of stuff. I think is where my strengths are.
That T analogy, I think, is that way of sort of typing people is important, because
Hmm.
as and I'm thinking to the founders that are getting their idea off and running, they may be more the CEO types, the business, the kind of the hustler type. The reality is that yes, you can find lots of generalists, but identifying where somebody's vertical, where they can go deep and really become an expert in something, that's often difficult in early stage startup land. That's difficult to identify. And I think for you to understand your team so that you find somebody who's really good on the technical and somebody who's really good at the holistic aspects of branding and design, those are the two things that are really needed in combination with the business side of things. I think to really, like you said, that whether that's one or two or three people, rarely one person, but
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
skill sets being as part of that early team, I think is extremely important.
Agreed.
So this has been an amazing conversation. A good part one, I think, introduction to
Yeah.
a number of the different topics that we talked about today. Where can people find you online?
People can find me most social places at just my name. I have Perry Azevedo on most everything that's out there. So you can go to protaventures.com. I'm on the team page there. They'll take you to my LinkedIn and then Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, just / Perry Azevedo. You'll find me.
Well, very insightful conversation. As always, Perry, I'm excited to share this with the world. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, a couple quick things before you go. Number one, I have a general newsletter where I write about technology and startups and health science and teaching people to code. And I write about a variety of different subjects that we talk about on this show. So if you go to wclittle.com, there you'll be able to subscribe, and you'll also be able to subscribe to particular topics. If you're just interested in one or a few of them, you'll be notified right when I publish new content in those areas. Number two, my partners and I at Proto Ventures have a portfolio company called Startup Rocket. If you go to startuprocket.com, there you'll be able to receive coaching guides and customize an operations framework for you and your team and your advisors to be on the same page in terms of what is the appropriate next step for you in your entrepreneurial journey. And finally, if you wouldn't mind leaving a review anywhere that you have listened to this podcast or watched this podcast, it'd be super helpful to help those who might be interested in consuming this content as well. Thank you.